just real quick, there's a couple questions.
Is that a little Tykes basketball net behind you? Two of them?
Yep, two of them. My 10-year-old helped me design this.
I like it.
This little setup here. But I've got a couple questions. I always like to ask people who have, achieved. I believe that experience is one thing, but, actually like accomplishing and achieving things throughout your journey means something. And the first question I want to ask is, was there a fail up moment for you somewhere? Personally, I had one. I was a senior in high school. And I failed. I flunked out. I couldn't walk with my graduating class in 1998. Had to go to military school, which I hated. It was literally like the most miserable year of my life. But it was exactly what I needed, because everything from that moment of failure, everything just went up. So I'm curious if you had one of those moments where you failed up.
I would say when I was anchoring at CNN, I got fired from my anchor job. I was anchoring with a guy named Miles O'Brien. So it was the two O'Briens. And I remember we had just finished covering. It was such a busy year. Pope died that year. It must have been the Katrina year. And I got fired. And it was offered to me to start doing documentaries. And, and the way it works when you're fired from anchoring is that you're fired, but you have to stay on the air. And they actually don't tell you until it runs in the New York Times. So it's like humiliation piled on humiliation. Like you're anchoring and people are like, girl, I just read this article.
Right.
The worst. And I remember thinking, like, Dick Parsons at Time Warner called me and he said, so how are you doing? And I was like, I'm doing okay. And he said, so this documentary thing, can you make it work? And I was like, you know what? I think I can make it work. And he goes, good. I think you can too. And I just remember thinking, like, I've always been good at, if plan A doesn't work, go to plan B. And it was so humiliating. I mean, literally, you're on the air and you get to do a little speech at the end. I just want to thank the crew and whatever at the end of the week. But to make a turn and go right to documentaries, which would actually be the thing that would allow me to start my own company, 5 or 6 or 7 years later, ended up being incredibly valuable. But at the time, it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is awful and humiliating and the worst. And I mean, you can't fail more than that. And it's public, right? So, your kids are like, Mommy, did you get fired? Like, yeah, yes, I did. And so I often tell that story because I try to let people know, I mean, it sounds so cheesy, but it is that when a door closes, kind of a window opens. I think I looked at the doc thing as, all right, well, let's see what this could be. And by doing it well and getting a good reputation in doing documentaries, it really changed my career trajectory. It allowed me eventually to be able to start a company because we would be able to create content, sometimes docs, but often we do a lot of series. So we have a series for HBO, we have a bunch of series for Discovery. Like, it just allowed me to stop doing daily news and to do something else and to do it well. At the time, it felt like the biggest mess and embarrassment ever. And so I think it's really important for people to realize, like, the horrible thing might actually be the good thing if you can keep on track with what you're trying to get out of it and making sure that you don't spend all your time mired in, this is horrible, this is horrible, this is horrible. And instead, what's on the other side of really embarrassing or really horrible.
Absolutely. Again, that embarrassment part, I mean, here I am, like the state player of the year in North Carolina, and then it's like, he's not going to graduate high school. It was hard those next couple months, just sort of like everybody looking at me like, man, you didn't graduate,
right?
You didn't graduate high school, man. That was like, there was no lower point for me, in terms of at that point in my life. So, and then the second one is, it's a lighter question, but in the morning, I grew up, I was born in 1980, so I came through college.
You were born in 1980?
1980.
I'll even tell you where I was born.
When were you born?
1989.
I was born in 1966. Oh. But I'm going to tell everybody I was born in 1986. Carry on.
There you go. But I came through particularly the last couple years of the 90s, inner yoga, mindfulness, all this stuff started, right? And I'm somebody that's I bought into it to a degree, but I've always, from that era, I would say, people started doing things and really focusing on the morning, right? When I was in college, it was all about like sleeping. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, You need to wake up in the morning. You need to start your day at like 5:30. And people started falling into these different routines. So my simple question is, when you wake up in the morning, is there something that you do every single morning that sort of gets you balanced, that you might be willing to share with us?
Yeah, and I think morning routine is really, really important. It's been weird on this coronavirus thing, right? That all of our routines are kind of messed up. Normally, I get up at like 5 or 5:30. Try to go to bed relatively early, 9 o'clock or something. But I try to get 8 hours of sleep. And there was a time when I thought if you got 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep, you were killing it. And I think I'm just, a lot of brain science is, no, actually, you need 8 hours of sleep. So I go to bed earlier. I tend to get up in the morning and then I try to work out first thing because I'm lazy. And if I don't do it first thing, and I have a protein shake because I'm trying to be a vegan. And I'm kind of a cheating vegan at times. But I find kind of like if you start off eating well and getting your workout out of the way and then making your to-do list, you literally have accomplished 86% of what you need to get done.
Right.
It kind of just keeps me on track. And I'm a Virgo and we tend to be tightly wound. And, I walk around literally with my list in my house and yelling at my children to get certain things done. Right. But I always felt like you had to start early and just tick shit off your list. If I did what I did in college, which was, roll out of bed at 10:30 or 11, then forget it. Like you're going even get done. So I agree with you. I think your morning routine, and they often have a lot of successful CEOs, like Warren Buffett, what does he do in the morning? And he reads like 8 books, before 9 a.m. or something crazy. I don't do that. But I definitely try to like start my day and stay on track. And I think if you could eat well and you could just knock out some exercise, you've gone a really long way to a good morning.
Absolutely. That's 2. Let's dunk it home. There we go.
That didn't seem very hard. That doesn't seem like it's as high as it should be.
No, it's just my arms are incredibly long as well.
That's what happens when you're 6'9".
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, so now shifting gears again, Professional Collegiate League, for those of you, this might be the first time you've ever heard about it. Soledad, you're on our advisory board. And there might also be a little something going on with SOB Productions and the PCL. But so in general, what's drawn you to sports and what drew you to us?
I think what drew me to you guys was this idea of justice and fairness. And again, looking at systems and how systems are working for people or not working for people, how students cannot figure out how to be compensated for something that's being built on their back seems incredibly unfair. And when you look and dive into those arguments, they're terrible arguments. They never ever work, right? And you see, CBS News or CBS or any of the networks making tons of money off of college sports, and the students themselves, in fact, get in a lot of trouble if they try to make any money off of their own names, their own likeness. So, and the rules are obviously very stringent. So I like the idea of how could you fix a system, really taking a systemic approach to create something new that would both help students who want to pay and compensate them, put education front and center so that it wasn't a, wink, wink, we really don't care if they graduate or not. I spent a lot of time covering certainly basketball players who financially, was really challenging for them. They need the money. And how could they figure out how to get compensated for what they were doing? So I love the idea of a systemic approach to making things fair and just for students, but not bother to educate people and just make them professional players, but pretend they're college players. I think that happens a lot, that kind of like, we're going to pretend thing. And so that's why I was very interested in being involved. My involvement in sports, I played rugby in college. It's why I'm missing an ACL in my right leg. And my dad was a professional athlete. He was a professional rugby player. He played for Australia in the 50s. And so I was not a sports maniac, but I was okay at sports. I'm decently athletic. I do a lot more horseback riding now. I think my sports that I deal with now are my boys are very into sports, and my kids go to a school where they have to play sports. My daughter is a really fantastic diver and has been a very successful high school diver, winning a bunch of competitions. My other daughter, I would say she is present and accounted for on the field hockey field. My husband and I watching field hockey, we're like, what the hell is this game? How do you, what happened? I never knew. We got through it. And we just never really learned the rules of field hockey ever. But I did love a place, and I actually love any school where kids have to compete, right? They have to do, in my kids' school, they have a sport 3 times a year. They have to pick a sport. And so usually there's a sport you love and you're good at. And then the other 2 semesters, a lot of stuff you're not good at and you don't love. And I like that, showing people that you don't have to be great, that you can still compete. You can compete and you can deliver a lot, and you can be on the varsity or the JV, or even they have a thirds team. And sometimes they have a fourths team, and everybody can still contribute and help build something. It's not always about, hey, if you're not the very, very best, don't bother. And
Right.
so I've lived through field hockey, diving, lacrosse, squash, basketball. My boys actually play a lot of lacrosse, and that's the sport that they really, really, really love. Soccer is another one. And so it's fun to see them in the sport that they love. Spent a lot of time watching that, and my husband played lacrosse in college. And then, other sports that were just present there while it's unfolding around us. And my daughter she was actually the one who's a diver, was a pretty decent athlete, but she hated soccer so much that she'd do handsprings off on the sideline. My husband's like, I cannot watch this child not be committed to her sport. I think diving was the first time she really found something that she loved. But I love sports. I love sports not for sports. I love sports for what it builds in people. I
Right.
love that it challenges you. I love that it forces you to be around people who you might not ever pick as your friends. I like that it makes you work toward a common goal, and that you get a whole lot out of losing, sometimes even more than winning. And the story of coming back is a very, it's a little bit of a hero's journey. We did a doc on a boxer during when women's boxing was in the London Olympics the first time, a boxer named Marlena Esparza. And she lost her match. And I just remember we went to shoot her a couple of days later, and she was in mourning. She had not lost a match in 13 years.
Whoa.
And then all of a sudden, then one day she gets up and laces up her sneakers and goes for a run. And you're like, and she's back. She would end up winning a bronze medal in the Olympics, and we got to go on this journey with her, right? But it's about, do you allow yourself to be defeated? And you can be in 4th squash, or you can be an Olympic boxing hopeful, and you're still challenged to, what does it mean for you to show up and stand up and try again and be defeated and come back? I mean, I just think it's such a great metaphor for every big challenge. That's why I love Real Sports on HBO, right? Because it's the prism of sports as looking through stories is so fascinating. It's not the, how do you score it? How do you win? How do you lose? I mean, who cares about that? It's the, what kind of person can come through the other end?
Right.
And the person who you thought could do it sometimes can't. And the person who you counted out completely sometimes can. And that, I think, is so inspirational and informs all the rest of us who are just trying to get through. So I love sports as a prism.
So, as any lawyer should do when there's not a judge overlooking them, I'm going to ask a leading question here. The argument that a college experience and education would be diminished by compensation, so specifically for a college athlete. As a pre-med and as a journalist while you were in college, do you feel like if you were being paid for your craft, that it would have in any way taken away from your college experience?
No, it's a completely absurd point, Your Honor. It's obviously absurd. I know it's a leading question, but it's ridiculous. And when people talk about how it's going to take away from your experience, it doesn't even make sense. I think for so many of these student athletes, they are working so hard and they spend so much time actually on the sport that it's just amazing to me. I mean, when we have one young woman who played basketball at Georgetown, I know several others. It's so much that I think for them compensation would help relieve some of the pressure. And I think even people who argue the opposite of that really understand it. I mean, listen, I think this entire thing is trending this way. It is just unfair. It is just unfair. Even the people who are arguing against it, you look at them and you're like, yeah, they know it's just unfair. So no, of course it wouldn't detract from their experience, whatever that word experience means. Obviously not.
Last thing we wanted to touch on, again, obviously we are doing this remotely and not in person as we all wanted to do.
6 feet, baby. I don't want anybody near me.
Throughout this period of social isolation, obviously you have your family and you guys have probably hopefully gotten to have some quality time together. Is there any hobbies?
So much quality time. So much. So much.
Are there any hobbies that you've really gotten to sort of reconnect with or do every day that maybe your schedule doesn't usually permit you to do?
Yeah, it's been, it's such a weird question, right? Because it's sort of like, what's been the upside of being socially isolated? And I will say every day around 5 o'clock, my husband takes the boys out to play lacrosse with them. And that's amazing to watch because often it doesn't happen. We live in New York City usually, and he never gets out of work before 5 o'clock, right? So this idea of just the kids being able to do that with their dad every day is awesome. And I know that they love it. And I like, it's right outside of my bedroom window, so I get to watch it happening, and it's great. And I think, we also kind of cook as a family. I'm a terrible cook, and I hate cooking, but I hate it, but I'm also bad at it. And my daughter is fantastic. So I'm a cleaner. I will clean, I will scrub all the dishes, and I'll put stuff away, and I can take direction. I'll chop onions and slice things. But dinner has become kind of a family, what are we going to have tonight? How do we pull it together? And then so, my husband travels a lot. I travel a lot. And this idea of like being stuck in a place and you can't travel and you can just hang out and play checkers and some other silly board games and make long dinners and play sports with the kids in the backyard. I mean, parts of that have been, my husband and I were just talking about it as we went on a long walk together today. Usually don't get a lot of time to do. Like, it's been really pleasant to spend a lot of time with the kids and not have to, say, listen, I got to wrap this up because I've got to get to the airport, or, oh, I'm not going to be able to make it. I'm going to come to this game, but I'm going to run in and run out. I really, it has probably made me really rethink how much travel I do and kind of slowing down and how do you think about doing that. So I think a lot's going to change after this. This will end. We will not be so socially isolated forever. I think people have grasped technology enough that we'll have more meetings like this because everyone will say, I want to hang out with my kids. So let's do a Zoom call and not get on a plane where we're all hanging out eating, but none of us get to hang out with our kids. So I think it's going to change a lot of things, actually.
Do the board games get competitive amongst the family? It sounds like you got a lot of athletes mixed in there.
It's so funny. Who's competitive? My husband. He's disguised as a non-competitive person, but he wants to win. I don't care because I'm usually running around, so someone is always like rolling the dice for me. Yeah, it gets messy. We also there's so many weird games now, like memes. There's games about memes, and some of them are like, we played a game the other day that was very off color, and I think my poor children were so embarrassed with playing a game with their mom. It was like identifying memes, and some of them were like little raunchy, and my boys were like, I can't do it. Like we can't.
I know the game you're talking about. Yeah.
This is supposed to be a game with like 10, 16-year-old boys, not mom, your older sisters. So that's been our bigger challenge. We have not gotten into Scrabble, which I am kind of a killer at. I have a degree in English literature. I think I can win at Scrabble. So that's what I'm waiting for.
Our last two things on the socially distanced front. Any binge-worthy shows? I know last time we saw each other, you told me like only on airplanes. That's like the only time.
So my sister is going through a divorce, and I went to spend some time with her, and she started watching this show on Netflix called Call the Midwife. This is going to be the worst description of a show ever, but I'm telling you, it's such a good show. It's on Netflix. Also, it has a lot of episodes because I think it has 8 seasons at 20 episodes per, so 1 million. So every night, because she was kind of emotionally a bit of a mess, she'd sit down and we'd watch together 2 episodes of Call the Midwife, which is about, in the 1950s, the National Health Service started in Great Britain, and they created this midwife service to help women who were having babies. And it's the most emotional, it's the greatest show ever. People are like, what? But it's really good. It's called Called Midwife. So I'm very into that. Everybody's watching Tiger King. I just don't think I need that kind of drama in my life. It just seems like too much. It's not really a documentary. It's a lot of recreations, right? So not that one. And now I was obviously Criminal Minds is my favorite show on television, but I've seen that was 20 seasons, 15 seasons, some ridiculous number. And again, 20 something episodes per. So I've seen every one, some of them twice. So I've moved on to NCIS. I need for me, television entertainment has to be very mindless. It can't be complicated. Oh my God. What was the one that everybody was watching that I hated? Oh, it was terrible. It just was so complicated following the storylines. I'm like, I have to be able to. Yeah, too much.
Scandal, I think, when you mentioned, yeah.
So it has to be mindless, simple, and you can walk away and come back and have missed nothing. That's the kind of show I need. It's been working very well for me.
I think David would probably recommend The Office to you.
Well, right. We've all seen, how great is
Right.
that?
Right.
You can walk away and come back. It's all good.
Right.
All right. And then my last question, I know my wife and I, we've talked about this, and I'm sure you've probably at least thought about it. What's the first thing that you want to do when we get the all clear from medical professionals?
You know, I have a couple of friends who are going through some tough times. I really would like to be able to hug them. You know, I mean, I miss hugging people. I miss being able to greet somebody with a hug. And I'm a hugger. And I miss being able to like hug people and hug on people and not scare them. And I think that's the hardest part of social distancing, right? Waving to someone is not the same. So I feel really lucky because we have a big family. I have 4 kids and then my husband, right? So we like our house is full. My best friend lives alone, you know, and I think it's kind of lonely, especially because you can't really touch anybody. So I'm just going to run around and hug people, and I'm going to creep a lot of people out. I'll be like, hey, come here, baby. But that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you. It's been great. A
Pleasure
pleasure to
was
meet you. I've been a fan for a good time since 1986.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. So nice to chat with you both.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
We look forward to finding a way to remotely recreate the panel discussion that we would have had soon.
Absolutely. Or just doing it together one of these days when we're all allowed out.
All right. Well, stay 6 feet apart and stay safe. And thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Take care, you guys.
All right.